So, not surprisingly, Israel and the US have rejected a pragmatic solution that would allow Palestinians to remain in Gaza and rebuild their destroyed homes. Yesterday, Arab leaders convened in Cairo to discuss Egypt's bold $53 billion reconstruction plan, offering Gaza a future without displacement, without ethnic cleansing. This plan is in response to the previous Trump proposal, which suggested the forced removal of 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza to turn the Strip into a luxury Riviera for the Middle East, which the US would own. And while the Egyptian initiative gained widespread support from Arabs, Palestinian groups, Israel swiftly dismissed it. To unpack these developments and their broader implication, we are joined once again with my friend, the Palestinian journalist and analyst, Muhammad Shehada. Muhammad, thank you very much for being with us again.
For having me.
Muhammad, let's break down what this means for the future of Gaza and the Palestinian cause. First, can you please tell us what is in this Egyptian proposal that got Israel to reject it immediately out of hand?
So basically, the Israeli rejection is twofold. Number one, Israeli officials, American officials, European officials, and Arab officials have been telling us behind closed doors that Trump's idea for Gaza is, quote, unimplementable, ridiculous, impossible, impractical. Everyone knows this. So the Egyptians tried to propose an alternative vision to tell Trump that there could be an alternative reality in Gaza whereby you rebuild it from scratch again, you make it habitable again, and you make it even a better place. So the Egyptian plan is not only about reconstructing what Israel destroyed in Gaza, that is estimated to be, I think, about like $25 billion. The Egyptians are asking for $53 billion to turn Gaza into a much better place than what it was on October 6th. So they are proposing to build an airport, a seaport, to expand the area of Gaza by 14 square kilometers, using the rubble from the destroyed homes into building in the water, in the ocean, in the Mediterranean, as well as building agricultural zones, cultural zones, building recreational areas, building hotels. So basically rebuilding Gaza into what Israel used to call it back in the days as a propaganda slogan, Singapore and the Mediterranean, or Dubai and the Mediterranean. The Egyptian Arab plan is trying to build towards that. So for Israel, that's a no-go zone because, as I told you before, Israel is banning any permanent installations in northern Gaza as of now, even caravans. They consider caravans to be permanent installations. So they are saying that Gaza should remain uninhabitable and every person in Gaza should be kicked out either forcibly or voluntarily. Voluntarily, as you have the choice between slow death or leave and just look forward and never come back. So there's the other dimension. The other dimension is that the Arabs and the Egyptians and Palestinians are now putting the most generous offer on the table ever for Israel, period. The offer is twofold. Number one, Israel is saying the two-state solution at the moment is impossible. There's no confidence between Israelis and Palestinians. There's a great deal of hostility in Israeli society after October 7th. So the Arab world is saying, okay, we hear all of this. Let's have a medium-term truce whereby there would be full cessation of hostilities and violence in the entirety of the occupied Palestinian territory and in Israel, as well as complete cessation of unilateral measures. So expansion of settlements, disposition of homes, home demolitions, annexation, or change of status quo in the holy areas, Al-Aqsa Mosque, for example, as well as any measures that Israel considers unilateral on the Palestinians' part. All of these would be stopped. And in that period, there would be confidence-building measures between Palestinians and Israelis to show to Israeli society that there is a path towards peace, and to show to the Arab world that there is a path towards sort of solving the conflict. The second dimension of the Arab proposal is normalization between every single Muslim Arab country and Israel. If it gives Palestinians 22% of historic Palestine, or even less than that, with land swaps, where Israel gets to keep some of the settlement blocks, and in return gives Palestinians land inside Israel of equal value and status. In return, every single Muslim country, that includes Iran, Malaysia, Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, countries that Israel considers extremely hostile towards it, would all normalize relations with it if it gives Palestinians only 22% of historic Palestine. That, for Israel, is seen as Palestinian Arab maximalism. That's why it was rejected immediately. There's another Israeli concern. There's an Israeli security analyst called Avner Yaniv. He wrote a book called Dilemmas of Security in 1982. In that book, he describes what he calls a Palestinian peace offensive. that is a major existential threat to Israel. What is the Palestinian peace offensive? Avner Yaniv says, when Palestinians become too moderate, too peace-seeking, that Israel runs out of propaganda and finds itself at the end of the line, and it does not have any room for maneuver. It has to sit down with them on the table and negotiate. So that's why you had Israel being in full panic mode, as well as the Americans, and immediately saying the Egyptian Arab proposal is unrealistic and we reject it completely out of hand. They refuse to even have any discussion about it.
Wow. And you know, Muhammad, for years, the Palestinian people have been subjected to racism and injustice and lies that the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. While in fact, we know for sure that the Palestinians and the Arabs in general have been offering solutions after solutions after solutions, but Israel never agrees to any of these solutions. Is this another example of the Palestinian and the Arab pragmatism versus the Israeli stubborn?
So basically, the Israeli rejection of the Arab-Egyptian plan, it entails two very incredible and significant indicators. Number one, Israel is rejecting outright the most generous offer that's ever been put on the table. Number two, Israel never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. So Israel always complains about that in the inverse, that it's Palestinians who do this. But if you look at the actual record, in 1975-76, that's when the PLO officially endorsed a UN Security Council resolution that would recognize Israel, would move towards a two-state solution. Back then, the Arab world was behind it. PLO is approving of it, and Israel rejects it completely out of hand. The US vetoes the resolution. In 1981, there was an Arab summit in Morocco, in Fez, in which there was the King Fahd initiative, which is an early copy of the Arab initiative. The King Fahd initiative was basically saying, if Israel ends the occupation, there would be full normalization between Israel and the entire Arab world. Israel would be integrated into the Middle East, period, end of the story. Israel would become part of the Middle East. Back then, that's when Avner Yaniv termed it dilemmas of security, termed it a peace offensive. Israel went into panic mode. They said, okay, the Arabs, Palestinians are coming up with a plan that is generous, that is tempting. They might be able to mobilize the international community for this, that Palestinians are rising to what Avner Yaniv called international respectability. They're becoming the moderates, the peace-seeking part. That's why Israel, in part, that's one of the reasons why Israel launched the Lebanon invasion and war of 82 to kill the Arab initiative, the peace initiative, to kill the Palestinian peace offensive. If you fast forward a little bit to 1988, when Palestinians declared outright, completely, openly, officially, official endorsement of the two-state solution and Resolution 181, which recognizes Israel as a Jewish state. So you had the most historic, unprecedented Palestinian compromise ever. Palestinians saying, we want 22% of our historic land, and that's about it. End of the story. We're not going to bother you with anything anymore. What was Israel's reaction to this? They went into full panic mode, literally. The foreign ministry, they immediately formed a crisis team. It's all on record. You can see it in the Washington Post, in New York Times, in Los Angeles Times, and others. The foreign ministry forms a crisis team to kill that initiative. Israel's defense minister back then, who is now remembered in Israel as sort of a hero of peace, an icon of peace, Yitzhak Rabin, he called that extremely dangerous and said, we have to kill it in the bud. The Israeli prime minister at the time said the same thing. Basically, Israel called out Jewish activists that went to meet with Arafat. They called them out as traitors and sellouts because they are lending credence to a Palestinian peace offensive. If you move a little bit forward to the 90s, where Hamas becomes the obstacle, just Google these specific words. Google Israel, Yassin, we could have made peace. And then an article in Haaretz would show up in which the interrogator of Ahmed Yassin, the co-founder of Hamas, the most prominent leader of Hamas, is saying this explicitly. We could have made peace under Yassin's leadership when he was alive in the 90s. Then write again on Google, Israel, we could have made peace under who came after Yassin? Rantisi. You will find an article. Change the name. Ismail Haniyeh. You will find also an article about, literally, there's an article that says Ismail Haniyeh sent a letter in Haaretz as well, Israel's mainstream left-wing media. They say Ismail Haniyeh sent a letter to the Bush administration demanding talks about the two-state solution. It was rejected out of hand. The Arab proposition that was made yesterday, the Arab Vision in Egypt, it's very similar to a proposal that was made by a Hamas leader, Ahmed Youssef, in 2006. So basically, back then, Tunisia allowed two Hamas leaders, Ahmed Yusuf Sayyid Abu Msameh, into the UK on an exceptional visa. They took them to meet with leaders of the IRA and the Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland, and meet with members of parliament, the House of Commons, the House of Lords in the UK. After which Ahmed Yusuf worked on this proposal, a peace proposal to the Israelis that was premised on what the Egyptians were proposing yesterday: temporary or medium-term truce, let's say for 5 years, 10 years, in which confidence building is built between Israelis and Palestinians, full cessation of hostilities, and then we move towards a solution to the conflict. Israel's reaction was to call on Tony Blair to never allow those leaders into the UK again.
Wow.
They were never allowed again. It was killed out of hand. So even when the genocide started in Gaza, you had Ismail Haniyeh going on a press conference and saying, we are ready for a political process. We are ready to negotiate. We are ready for the two-state solution. You had two Hamas leaders going on record and saying, we are willing to lay our arms down. We are willing to disarm, integrate the Qassam brigades into a Palestinian army or security force if Israel ends the occupation. Israel's answer to all of these: reject them completely out of hand. So it is an Israeli habit of sort of never missing an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
So, Muhammad, based on your research and your readings on this topic, have you come across any Israeli leaders today who are publicly calling for a solution which would allow Palestinians to live freely in their homeland instead of being under a permanent occupation, or worse, being ethnically cleansed?
Oh, that's basically when Europeans try to tell us there's no partner for peace on either side for Palestinians and Israelis, and there is a crisis of leadership. I immediately laugh it out and I respond to them: Palestinians in their totality, including Hamas, are now in a more pragmatic, more pro-peace position than the Israeli mainstream in its totality. What you have now on record is Hamas saying, we want to negotiate a two-state solution into the occupation. Whereas in Israel, even the Labour Party, the left-wing Labour Party, it's called the Democrats. It's a merger between Labour and Meretz. Even the Democrats headed by Yair Golan, an IDF general, Yair Golan is saying on record, the two-state solution is not going to happen anytime soon. Let's not try to make it happen. It's out of the question. It's not sort of an imminent, in the near, not too distant future possibility. It might happen in the future, but not anytime soon. That's Yair Golan. Look at Yair Lapid, says the exact same thing word for word. Those are the Israeli moderates. If you look at the Israeli center-right to the right and far right, Netanyahu and further to the right from that, or Naftali Bennett, Avigdor Lieberman, Gideon Sa'ar, and others, they're outright saying, no, we don't want a Palestinian state to begin with. That's why when you had two resolutions in the Israeli Knesset last year, one of them was about opposing what they called unilateral Palestinian statehood or unilateral recognition of Palestinian statehood. You had 99 members of the Knesset. So that is basically virtually every single Zionist Israeli Jewish member of the Knesset voted against a Palestinian state. The only people that opposed it in that Knesset session were the Palestinian Arab Israeli members of the Knesset and one Israeli Jewish member of the Knesset, Ofer Kasef, who's communist from the joint list with Ayman Odeh. You had another resolution presented this time, not only opposing Palestinian statehood unilaterally, but this time opposing Palestinian statehood, period. No Palestinian state whatsoever, not even through negotiations. And how did that go? You had 68 members of the Knesset voting for it, and not a single Zionist Jewish Israeli member of the Knesset that voted against, that said, I want Palestinian statehood. There were only 9 members that opposed it. Again, it was the Arab Israeli members of the Knesset and Ofer Kasef, who identifies as an anti-Zionist. So basically, the picture you have there is Israel's entire political mainstream in its totality is saying no to peace whatsoever, whether it's one state or two states or a confederacy or autonomy or self-rule. No, nothing.
Where does that leave us, Muhammad?
So basically, Israel is now in a position where it's jumping over a cliff, and it is self-radicalizing to an extreme extent that the only way to push back is to introduce some punitive measures. That's why I hear these voices becoming louder and louder in the European Union, calling for a tougher stance on Israel. The only problem is that you don't have that will. A political will is not there at all. In the EU, for example, you saw it a couple of days ago. Israel tosses the ceasefire agreement into the garbage and instates full ban on food and water going into Gaza through even the Egyptian borders, even the Egyptian Rafah border crossing. Israel suddenly says, we stopped all aid from going into Gaza, period. And the European Union's response was to condemn Hamas and not even call out Israel's prevention of food. They basically said Israel's decision to halt the entry of humanitarian aid may create some consequences. It's absolutely insane. I asked a friend who checked with people around Caracas about this. He said basically it was pushed by civil servants in the EU bureaucracy that are very pro-Israeli to their core, and it slipped through without any of sort of the people in their peers or their colleagues noticing or being aware of the actual picture. Like I'm always sort of shocked by the incompetence, ignorance. It is sort of deliberate ignorance of these otherwise well-resourced, overstaffed bureaucracies. They're supposed to know better, but they don't want to know. That's the point.
Muhammad, thank you very much for speaking to me today.
Thanks so much for having me. Always great to talk to you.